The night was bright and full of laughter. Expensive cars stopped one after another outside the golden gates of Richard Hale's mansion. The rich came dressed in glittering suits and long shining gowns. Waiters moved quickly, carrying trays of wine and snacks. Among them walked Emma, a young waitress with tired eyes and soft hands. She had been working since morning, her feet hurt, but she kept smiling. She needed this job, every small tip counted. Because her mother was sick and hospital bills were waiting at home, she tried to stay invisible. Blending with the walls and chandeliers, the guests laughed loudly, talking about their vacations and new cars. To them, the waiters were just background, not people. Emma listened quietly, her hands shaking slightly as she carried glasses of champagne. She was not from their world. Her old dress and plain shoes looked out of place in the sea of diamonds. At the center of the hall stood Richard Hale, the owner of the mansion, a man in his late 40s with cold eyes and a smile that never reached his heart. People laughed at his jokes even when they were not funny. He loved that kind of attention. He walked around like a king, tapping his glass and making sharp comments that made others laugh nervously. He had power, money, and arrogance in equal measure. Emma tried her best to stay away from him. She had seen how he treated staff, like toys once. She saw him fire a waiter just for sneezing during dinner, so she kept her head down and her tray steady. But fate does not ask permission, it just arrives. While she was serving near the piano, a man in a white suit bumped into her. The glass slipped from her tray and a few drops of champagne landed on Richard's expensive coat. For a second, everything went silent. The music stopped. The guest turned to look. Emma froze. Her heart beating fast, she whispered, "I'm so sorry, sir," and reached for a napkin. But Richard's eyes narrowed and his smile turned cruel. He looked down at the tiny stain on his coat as if it was a personal insult. "Well," he said loudly so everyone could hear, "it seems our waitress wanted to make me sparkle." The crowd laughed awkwardly. Emma felt her face burn red. She wanted to disappear, but he wasn't done. He leaned back on his chair, enjoying the attention. "Maybe we should let her make up for her mistake," he said, looking around the hall. "What do you all think?" The guests chuckled, not knowing what he planned. Emma stood still, holding her empty tray. Trying to stop her tears, Richard's eyes moved toward the big black piano sitting in the corner of the hall. The same piano that had been silent the whole night. He smirked and said, "You waitress, why don't you play us something? Let's see if you're better at music than serving drinks." Laughter filled the room again, sharper this time. Emma's lips parted, but no words came out. She wanted to say she couldn't, that it wasn't part of her job, but her voice was gone. Her throat felt dry, all eyes were on her. Some guests looked amused, others uncomfortable, but no one spoke for her. She looked at the piano, her reflection shining faintly on its surface. For a moment, something deep inside her stirred, something she had buried long ago, but fear pushed it back. She lowered her head and whispered, "I can't, sir." Richard raised an eyebrow, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, you can't? Then maybe you're only good at spilling drinks," he said, and the crowd laughed again. Emma's hands tightened around the tray. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She stood straight, looked at him for just 1 second, and saw how much he enjoyed her pain. That single look changed something in her. She felt anger, but not the kind that shouts, the kind that burns quietly, deep and slow. "Fine," she said softly, and walked toward the piano. The laughter stopped for a second. Replaced by whispers, Richard looked pleased, like a cat watching a trapped bird. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, expecting a disaster. Emma sat down on the piano bench, her heart racing. She placed her hands on her lap, afraid to touch the keys. Her reflection in the shiny black surface looked calm, but her heart screamed. The room was silent now, waiting for her to embarrass herself. But inside Emma, something else began to wake up. A memory of the girl she used to be before life became about bills and shifts and silence. The first part of her humiliation had begun, but no one in that golden room knew the truth. The girl they mocked was not just a waitress, she was once a dreamer, a musician, a soul who had not forgotten how to rise again. The story of the night had just started, and before it ended, they would all remember her name, Emma Hale, the girl with the piano and the heart that refused to break. The room was still glowing with laughter when Emma sat down at the piano. Her heart beat so loudly it almost drowned out the noise around her. She could feel hundreds of eyes piercing through her skin, judging her, waiting for her to fail. The piano keys were cold under her fingertips, and for a second she forgot how to breathe. Richard leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink, his smirk wide and cruel. He loved every moment of this, the great millionaire, embarrassing a waitress in front of his friends. It was entertainment for him. Emma's hands trembled slightly. She stared at the black and white keys, memories flooding back like waves crashing on a shore. She saw her father's old smile, the dusty piano in their small living room, the afternoons when he'd sit beside her, teaching her melodies until the sun went down. But that was a lifetime ago, a world that ended the day her father passed away. Any day now. Richard's voice sliced through the silence. Making the crowd chuckle, Emma swallowed hard. Her hands finally rested on the keys. She didn't know what she would play. Her mind was blank, just fear and shame echoing inside. Then, almost by instinct, her fingers pressed one note. Soft and uncertain, the sound broke the air. Delicate like a whisper, some guests turned to each other. Confused, they expected a disaster. Not this trembling, beautiful start. Emma's fingers moved again, this time finding another note and then another. The melody began to form on its own, fragile yet full of heart. Every sound seemed to come from deep inside her. Something she thought she had lost, the hall, which had been full of noise and arrogance moments ago, started to quiet down. The waiters paused in place. The guests leaned forward. Even Richard's grin faded slightly as the notes filled the golden hall. She played with closed eyes, not caring anymore who watched. She forgot the laughter, the people, the insults, and just remembered the feeling of playing. It was like her father was there again, beside her, whispering softly, "Don't be afraid of mistakes, Em. Just play what you feel." Her tears mixed with the rhythm as her hands danced over the keys. Every note stronger, clearer, more alive. The melody changed, rising and falling like her own life. Her struggles, her pain, her quiet strength. Each chord told her story. The girl who lost her dream, who worked in silence, who stood tall even when the world mocked her. The sound was pure emotion. Raw and haunting, the guests began to stare, mouths slightly open. They didn't understand how a waitress could play like that. Richard's fingers tapped his glass, but he didn't speak. His amusement had turned into confusion. He had wanted to humiliate her, but instead she had captured the room. The crowd that once laughed now sat frozen. Every note Emma played hit something deep within them, something money could never touch. By the middle of the song, people forgot they were at a party. Forgotten were the drinks, the fake smiles, the gossip. All they saw was a young woman pouring her soul into a piano. A woman who had nothing but music, and that was everything. The melody grew stronger, a mix of sorrow and power. It felt like a storm and a sunrise all at once. When the last note finally echoed and faded into silence, the world stood still. Emma's fingers stayed on the keys, trembling softly. Then, without warning, the room erupted into applause, real applause, not polite or forced. People stood up, clapping with tears in their eyes. Some even shouted, "Bravo!" Richard just sat there, frozen, his drink untouched. His pride shattered, Emma slowly stood up, her breathing heavy. She didn't bow, didn't say a word. She just looked around the hall one last time, at the people who had laughed at her and now looked at her with awe. She turned and walked away quietly, leaving behind the sound of clapping hands and stunned faces. That night, everyone in that hall learned something. The millionaire who thought he owned everything had been silenced by a girl who owned nothing but her courage. And Emma, she walked out not as a waitress, but as a reminder that dignity cannot be stolen. No matter how rich or powerful the room may be, she didn't look back as she stepped into the cold night. The air outside felt different, lighter for the first time in years. She smiled, a small, real smile somewhere deep inside. She knew that moment wasn't an end, it was a beginning. The music had found her again, and this time she wasn't going to let it go. The next morning, the Golden Hall was silent. But the story of the waitress who stunned the millionaire's guests had already spread beyond those walls. People whispered about her performance in cafes, in offices, and even online. Some called her brave. Others called her a hidden prodigy. But Emma didn't know any of this yet. She woke up early, her uniform still neatly folded on the chair. The memory of last night still flickered in her mind like a dream she wasn't sure was real. She sat by the small window of her apartment, sipping cheap coffee. The city outside was loud, but inside it was peaceful. And her mother's soft breathing came from the other room. Emma smiled faintly. That music she played, it wasn't for the guests, or for Richard Hale, it was for her mother, for her father, for the little girl who once believed in miracles. Her phone buzzed. She looked down, expecting another reminder for unpaid bills. But it was a message from one of her co-workers. "You're famous," it said, followed by a link to a video. Emma clicked it and her heart skipped. Someone had recorded her performance. The video showed her sitting at the piano, her fingers moving gracefully. The comments were full of shock and praise. "Who is she? This girl plays with soul. Even a millionaire can't buy talent like that." Emma didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her hands shook as she watched herself. That was her, humiliated, scared but still playing, still standing. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Mr. Lawson, the manager of the event staff company. He looked nervous, twisting his hat in his hands. "Emma," he began softly, "you need to come to the office right now." Mr. Hale called. Her chest tightened. She thought maybe he was angry again. Maybe he wanted to fire her or demand an apology. She followed Lawson quietly, her mind spinning with worry. When they reached the tall glass building, she saw Richard's car parked outside. The same black limousine from last night. Inside the office, Richard was waiting, dressed sharply as always. But his face looked different, less sure, less powerful. He turned when she entered, and for a moment he didn't speak. His eyes held something new, something like guilt. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't, she just stood there, hands folded in front of her. "Emma," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't know you could play like that." She didn't reply. He cleared his throat. "Last night I may have gone too far." He looked down, avoiding her gaze. "It was a joke. A bad one." Emma watched him silently. The same man who mocked her in front of 100 people now couldn't look her in the eye. "You embarrassed me," he continued, forcing a chuckle. "In front of all those people because you were brilliant." She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Brilliant," he repeated. "I mean it." Then he stood up, his tone shifting. "Listen, I have connections. I can get you a real opportunity, not just serving tables." He took out a card and placed it on the desk. "A friend of mine owns a music academy. They're always looking for talent. I can get you an audition." Emma stared at the card for a long moment. It was a strange feeling, being offered help by the same man who had tried to humiliate her. She picked it up slowly. "Why?" she asked softly. Richard sighed. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted." His voice dropped lower. "And because I owe you that much." She didn't answer. She simply nodded, thanked him politely, and walked out. The city air felt colder but clearer. She looked at the card in her hand. The words Silvercrest Academy of Music shining under the sun. A part of her wanted to throw it away. But another part, the part that still dreamed, held on to it tightly. That evening she went back to her mother, told her everything. Her mother listened quietly, her frail hands clasping Emma's. "Maybe," she whispered, "it's time you stop hiding from who you are." Emma smiled through her tears. "Maybe," she said. A week later she stood outside the academy, her old shoes scuffing the marble steps inside. She could hear faint music, students practicing, pianos echoing through long halls. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. For the first time in years, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't the girl who served drinks or took orders. She was Emma Hale, the girl who played with her heart, the girl who made a room full of millionaires fall silent. And as she walked toward her audition room, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt like she belonged somewhere deep down. She knew that the night Richard Hale tried to humiliate her had become the night that set her free. The grand halls of the Silvercrest Academy echoed with sounds of practice. Violins whispering through corridors, pianos thundering like storms behind closed doors. Emma stood outside room 12, clutching her hands together. Her old uniform shoes squeaked against the marble floor. Students passed by in crisp uniforms, some carrying sheet music, some laughing softly. She felt out of place among them, like a shadow in a field of light. But she couldn't turn back now. Inside the room sat a woman with silver hair tied in a bun and eyes sharp as glass. She looked up from her notes and said in a firm voice, "You must be Emma Hale." Emma nodded quietly. "Mr. Hale told us about you," the woman continued. "Said you were unconventional." There was a small smirk on her lips. "Well then, show me what's so special." Emma walked toward the piano, her hands trembling slightly. It was a different instrument, But the keys felt the same beneath her fingers, familiar. Like an old friend, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. The moment her hands moved, the room changed. The music that came out wasn't practiced or perfect, it was alive. Filled with emotion, every note told a story. Of hardship, of love, of pain, and of quiet courage. The woman's pen stopped moving halfway through. Her eyes softened. She leaned forward. Listening carefully, Emma played until her fingers ached. She ended with a soft, fading note that lingered like a sigh. For a few seconds there was only silence. Then the woman whispered, "My dear, where have you been hiding?" Emma smiled faintly. "Working," she said. The woman stood up, walked closer, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't belong in kitchens or banquet halls," she said gently. "You belong here in music." She turned to the assistant standing by the door. "Get her admission papers ready." Emma couldn't believe it. She stood frozen, her eyes filling with tears. The woman smiled kindly. "The world needs to hear what you have inside you," she said. "Never let anyone silence that again." When Emma stepped out of the academy, the sun was setting behind the city skyline. She walked slowly down the stone steps. Her acceptance letter in her hand, people hurried past her. Cars honked, but none of it mattered. She felt something deep inside her she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next few weeks were like a dream. She began classes, learning music theory again, meeting people who spoke the same language of rhythm and emotion. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't serving food, she was serving her soul. Some students admired her raw talent, others whispered that she didn't belong. But Emma didn't mind. She knew where she had come from. She knew what it meant to fight for a dream one afternoon. While practicing alone in one of the small rooms, she heard a soft knock on the door. When she turned, she was shocked to see Richard Hale standing there. Dressed simply, no entourage, no arrogance. He looked almost human. "I hope I'm not disturbing," he said quietly. She blinked in surprise. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I have ways," he said with a small smile. Then grew serious. "I came to apologize properly." She stared at him for a moment. Waiting, he stepped closer. "You didn't just embarrass me that night. You woke me up," he said. "I realized how small I had been, mocking people who had more heart than I'll ever have." Emma looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said softly. "But I owe myself the lesson you gave me." Then he handed her a small envelope. "This is a scholarship," he said. "Full tuition, all expenses. No strings." Emma's eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Richard smiled faintly. "Because I want to help fix something I broke." She hesitated, her heart torn between pride and gratitude. After a long pause, she accepted it. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded and turned to leave, but before he walked away, he added, "I may be rich, Emma, but that night, you showed me what true wealth sounds like." When he left, Emma sat by the piano again. Holding the envelope in her lap, she felt tears forming. Not of pain, but of release. For the first time, her past didn't feel like a wound, it felt like a melody, one that had led her right here. That night, as she practiced alone, she played a new song, one she had never written down. It was soft at first, then bold, then full of light. The windows shook gently with the power of her music. People walking by stopped to listen, not knowing that inside that room was a girl who had once been mocked by a millionaire, and now played as if she owned the stars. The waitress was gone, the musician had been born again, and somewhere deep in her heart, Emma knew her story had only just begun. The days at Silvercrest passed like pages in a songbook, each one different but full of rhythm. Emma's life had changed, but she hadn't yet realized how deeply. Every morning she woke before sunrise, made tea for her mother, and left for the academy with a second-hand notebook and a heart full of quiet fire. She still wore the same old shoes, the same simple clothes, but she walked with her head high now. She was not the waitress, she was Emma Hale, the pianist. Her name had begun to spread across the campus. Some called her the girl of the Golden Hall, remembering the story of how she silenced a room full of elites. A few students envied her raw gift, whispering that she didn't belong because she came from nowhere. But others admired her determination. One student in particular, a tall, kind-eyed violinist named Daniel, noticed her talent the most. Daniel was different from the others. He didn't care about her past, he respected her discipline. He often stayed after class to practice beside her, and soon their music began to blend. His violin dancing with her piano. Together they created something magical. One evening while practicing, Daniel said softly, "There's a citywide competition next month. The judges are world-class musicians. You should enter." Emma shook her head quickly. "I can't," she said. "I'm not ready." But he smiled. "Emma, you were ready the night you played for those who tried to humiliate you." Those words stayed in her heart for days. The thought of performing again, this time by choice, not by mockery, both thrilled and terrified her. Finally, she decided to try. She filled out the form, hands trembling, and dropped it off at the academy office. That night, she told her mother, who smiled weakly and whispered, "Your father would be so proud." Weeks passed, and Emma practiced harder than ever. The notes from the piano filled her small apartment every evening. Sometimes neighbors stopped in the hallway to listen. Her mother would sit by the window, eyes closed, letting the music heal her tired heart. The day of the competition came like a storm. The grand city auditorium was packed with people, judges, students, and reporters. Emma sat backstage in a simple dress, her hands icy. She could hear the crowd cheering for other performers, each one more confident and polished than the last. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "You've already faced worse," when her name was called. The lights dimmed slightly. She walked onto the stage alone. The piano gleamed under the spotlight. She could feel the audience waiting, many unaware that the girl on stage had once served drinks at the very parties they attended. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began. Her fingers moved like wind over water. The melody started soft, rising slowly into power. Every note was her story, the humiliation, the courage, the rediscovery. Her music filled every corner of the hall, echoing against glass and hearts alike. The crowd leaned forward, silent and mesmerized. When she reached the final chord, she let it linger, holding it until the air itself seemed to tremble. Then she lifted her hands, and the hall erupted. Applause thundered through the building. People stood clapping, shouting her name. One of the judges, a famous composer, had tears in his eyes. "This," he whispered, "is what music is meant to be." Emma bowed, trying not to cry. She had done it, not to prove herself to anyone, but to reclaim her soul as she stepped off stage. Daniel met her with a grin. "Told you," he said, handing her a small white rose. She laughed for the first time in months, pure and light. Later that evening, when the results were announced, Emma's name was called again, first place. The crowd cheered, flashes from cameras lit her face. She stood on stage holding the trophy, shaking her head in disbelief. Somewhere in the back row, a man in a dark suit watched quietly, Richard Hale. He didn't clap for attention or approach her afterward. He just smiled, proud but humbled. He had tried to shame her once, but tonight, he saw her rise higher than he ever could. Emma spotted him for a brief moment and nodded faintly. It wasn't anger she felt anymore. It was closure that night when she returned home. Her mother was waiting with tears of joy. They sat together on the couch, holding hands. The trophy stood on the small table beside them, shining faintly in the lamplight. "You did it, my girl," her mother whispered. Emma smiled. "No, Mom," she said softly. "We did, and somewhere." Deep in her heart, she realized something. The night of humiliation had been the beginning of everything. Without that moment, she would never have remembered who she truly was. The music had led her back to herself, and this time she was never letting go. The morning after the competition felt unreal. The city still whispered her name, Emma Hale. The waitress who became a piano sensation. Her picture was in the local paper, headlines calling her the soul of Silvercrest. But to Emma, fame didn't feel like fireworks. It felt quiet, like peace after a long storm. She sat by the small kitchen table, her mother smiling proudly beside her. The trophy gleamed softly in the sunlight. "You see?" her mother said in a trembling voice. "The world finally heard what I've always known." Emma reached out, squeezing her mother's hand. "I didn't play for them, Mom," she said softly. "I played for us." Her phone buzzed constantly that day. Messages from reporters, music agents, and strangers who had seen her video. One message, however, made her stop. It was from the Silvercrest Academy director. "You have a guest waiting in my office," it said. Emma frowned. She hadn't scheduled anything, but curiosity pushed her to go. When she arrived, sitting in the office was a woman in an elegant navy suit. Her eyes sharp yet warm. "Emma Hale," she said, standing. "I represent the National Philharmonic Orchestra. I heard your performance, and I must say it's been a long time since music made me cry." Emma blinked, not sure if she was dreaming. The woman smiled. "We'd like to invite you to perform as a guest pianist in our upcoming gala concert." For a moment, Emma forgot how to speak. "Me?" she asked. "Yes, you," the woman said. "We believe your story and your music will move the audience." She handed Emma an envelope with the official invitation. "It's in 2 weeks at the Grand Royal Hall." Then she added gently, "This could be the beginning of your real career." Emma left the office holding the envelope like it was made of glass. Her heart raced. 2 weeks. The same girl who had once been laughed at in a rich man's house was now going to perform in one of the most prestigious halls in the country. She practiced every single day, long hours until her fingers ached. Sometimes Daniel joined her, adding violin to her rehearsal. Sometimes her mother sat nearby, smiling through quiet tears. The pressure was heavy, but Emma didn't fear it. She had already faced humiliation and pain. Nothing could scare her now. The night of the gala arrived. The Grand Royal Hall sparkled with chandeliers, velvet curtains, and golden railings. The seats were filled with powerful figures, businessmen, celebrities, and world-class musicians. Emma stood backstage in a simple black gown, her heart pounding but steady. She closed her eyes and whispered, "This time, I play because I choose to," as she stepped on stage. The lights followed her, the conductor nodded, and the orchestra began. The violins rose softly, and then her piano answered. The music wasn't just notes, it was a conversation between her past and her present, the humble girl and the artist she had become. The melody grew stronger, deeper. She played with emotion so pure that even the orchestra seemed to fade behind her. People in the audience stopped breathing for moments at a time. Her music told them everything words couldn't. The pain of struggle, the strength of survival, the beauty of rebirth. When she struck the final chord, the hall stood silent for a heartbeat. Then came the roar of applause, louder than thunder. The audience rose to their feet, cheering her name. Tears blurred her vision as she bowed deeply. This wasn't humiliation, it was redemption. Backstage, the same navy-suited woman approached, smiling broadly. "That was extraordinary." "Emma," she said, "the world will know your name now." Emma laughed softly. "It's not the world I want," she said, "just the music." As she turned, she noticed someone standing quietly near the exit. Richard Hale. His presence startled her for a moment, but his face wasn't proud or mocking. It was humble, respectful. He clapped softly and mouthed the words, "Well done," before leaving. She didn't chase after him, she didn't need to. Some debts in life are repaid not with words, but with change. And Richard Hale, the man who once used humiliation as entertainment, had changed too. Later that night, Emma walked alone through the quiet city streets, the echo of her performance still alive in her mind. The cold breeze brushed against her hair, and she looked up at the night sky, whispering a thank you to her father, to her mother, to fate, even to Richard, because every cruel laugh had become part of her symphony. When she reached home, her mother was waiting by the window, eyes shining. "How was it?" she asked. Emma smiled gently. "It was everything, Mom." That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of excitement, but because she finally understood something deep. Life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about turning it into music. Her story was no longer about a girl forced to play piano at a party. It was about the woman who turned that pain into a melody that healed others. The world outside began to recognize her name. But Emma didn't chase fame. She chased feeling, she chased truth. She chased the next song waiting in her heart. And somewhere in that quiet, she realized she was exactly where she was meant to be. The weeks following the gala performance unfolded like a dream Emma had never dared to have. Her name appeared in newspapers, music magazines, and even television interviews. From waitress to wonder pianist, one headline read, "She had become a symbol of resilience, a living proof that talent can bloom even from pain." Yet fame didn't change her heart. She still rode the same bus to the academy, still helped her mother with breakfast, still practiced until her fingers ached. But one day, as she sat by her piano, a letter arrived. It was thick, official-looking, and sealed with gold. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was an invitation from the International Symphony Foundation. It read, "We are pleased to invite Emma Hale to perform as our opening soloist at the World Harmony Concert in Vienna." Emma's breath caught. Vienna, the birthplace of legends, the concert where only the world's finest musicians performed. She ran to her mother's room, bursting with excitement. "Mom, Vienna!" she gasped. "They want me to play in Vienna." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. She hugged her tightly, whispering, "You've come so far." "My little girl," Emma smiled through her tears. "We've come so far." The next few days were a blur of preparation. She worked with her teachers, refined her technique, and chose the piece she would perform. It wasn't a famous classical piece, it was her own composition. The same melody she had once played in humiliation at Richard Hale's mansion. But now reborn with power and pride, she called it "The Night That Made Me." When the day of departure came, the academy students gathered to see her off. Daniel handed her a small locket shaped like a treble clef. "For luck," he said with a grin. "Don't forget where you started." Emma laughed softly. "I never could." The flight to Vienna felt unreal. Clouds drifted below, and as she stared through the window, she thought about everything: the spilled champagne, the cruel laughter, the trembling first note that had changed everything. The universe had a strange way of leading people where they belonged. When she arrived, the Vienna Grand Concert Hall took her breath away. It was massive, filled with marble pillars and golden ceilings that seemed to touch heaven itself. The air carried history. She walked across the stage during rehearsal, running her fingers over the keys of the grand Steinway piano. It felt alive under her touch, like it had been waiting just for her. The night of the concert came quickly. The audience was a sea of elegant faces from all over the world. Critics, composers, musicians, all waiting. The conductor introduced her with quiet reverence. "Tonight," he said, "we present a story of courage, of music born from humility, Miss Emma Hale." The applause was polite at first, but when she stepped on stage, people leaned forward, curious. She took her seat, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first notes were gentle, almost like whispers from her past. Slowly they grew, painting a journey. Of humiliation turned into strength, of pain turned into grace. Her hands moved like flowing water, her body swaying slightly with each chord. Every sound spoke, not to ears but to hearts. Midway through, something magical happened. The audience, silent as stone, began to feel her story. Some closed their eyes, some wiped tears. The melody rose higher, brighter, until it filled the hall like light itself. Emma didn't just play music that night. She told a story of rebirth, of a girl who was forced to play for laughter but now played for the world. When the final note echoed and faded, the silence that followed was pure and heavy. Then came the standing ovation, louder, longer, deeper than any she had heard before. Flowers rained on the stage, cameras flashed, but Emma didn't move for a few seconds. She just sat there, her hand over her heart, whispering a thank you to the universe. Backstage, the director of the symphony approached her, tears in his eyes. "You didn't just perform, Miss Hale," he said. "You reminded us what art truly means." She smiled, humbled. "It means never letting go," she said softly. Later that night, as she sat in her hotel room overlooking the lights of Vienna, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it and froze. It was from Richard Hale. The message read, "I watched your performance tonight, Emma, from the live stream. You've become everything I once pretended to be. I'm proud of you. Truly proud." Emma stared at the screen for a long moment, then smiled. She typed back, "Thank you, Mr. Hale. For everything, good and bad, both were lessons." She set her phone aside and looked out the window. The stars above Vienna glittered like piano keys, and she whispered to herself, "The music never ends." That night, she realized her journey wasn't about revenge or recognition. It was about redemption, about turning pain into purpose and silence into song. And as the city slept below her, Emma Hale, the girl who once trembled before a crowd, was now a name the world would never forget. The flight back home from Vienna was quiet, yet Emma couldn't stop smiling. Her fingers traced the airplane window as clouds rolled beneath her. The applause still echoed in her mind, the roar of thousands who had stood for her music. She had walked into that stage as a former waitress and walked out as an artist whose name carried weight. But what mattered more than fame was peace. For the first time in years, she felt free when she landed. Flashes met her at the airport. Reporters rushed toward her with microphones. "Miss Hale, how does it feel to represent our country in Vienna?" One asked, "What inspired your piece?" Asked another. Emma smiled kindly and replied, "Pain inspired it, but hope finished it." The cameras caught her words, and they spread across every news feed that day. As she drove back to her neighborhood, she saw faces light up. Shopkeepers waving, children pointing. Her small world had changed, but it still felt like home. Her mother was waiting by the window, just like always, when Emma stepped inside. Her mother's weak hands reached out and pulled her into an embrace. No words were needed, just tears and laughter. "I saw you on TV," her mother whispered. "I knew the world would listen one day," Emma smiled. "You were my first audience." "Mom," the following weeks were a blur of invitations, interviews, offers, scholarships, and even international tours. Yet she stayed grounded, choosing carefully, refusing to let fame turn her music into business. One afternoon, as she practiced at the academy, the headmistress entered the room. "Emma," she said, "the mayor has requested you play at the annual charity gala next week. It's being held at the Hale Mansion." Emma froze. The Hale Mansion, the same golden hall where everything began, the same place where she was humiliated years ago. Her heartbeat quickened. "Are you sure?" she asked. The headmistress nodded. "Yes. They specifically asked for you." That night, Emma sat alone by her piano, the memory of that night flashing through her mind. The laughter, the humiliation, the fear. But then came the music, the silence that followed, the applause that changed everything. She realized this was not a circle of fate, it was closure. She whispered to herself, "Then I'll go, not as a waitress, but as who I am now." The night of the gala arrived. The same chandeliers sparkled above. The same marble floors gleamed under golden light. But this time the atmosphere was different. The guests stood when Emma entered, clapping respectfully. At the center table sat Richard Hale, older now, quieter when their eyes met. He smiled, a real one, not the cruel grin she remembered. She approached him after her performance rehearsal. He stood and said softly, "You've turned this house into something beautiful again." Emma smiled politely. "Maybe it just needed the right song," he chuckled. "Perhaps it did." After a pause, he added, "I sold my company last year. Started a foundation for young musicians, especially those who can't afford to study." Emma looked surprised. He nodded. "I thought maybe I could help others the way I should have helped you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The past hung between them, not heavy, but healed. Emma finally said, "Thank you, Mr. Hale." For that night, he blinked, puzzled. "You're thanking me?" She nodded gently. "If you hadn't forced me to play, I might have forgotten who I was." His eyes softened. "Then maybe we both learned something." When Emma took the stage that night, she didn't play the song of pain. She played something new, a melody full of light, of forgiveness, of freedom. The notes floated through the same hall that once echoed with cruel laughter. Now they brought tears, smiles, peace. As the final note faded, everyone stood applauding. The sound filled the mansion like sunlight breaking through clouds. Richard stood too, clapping with quiet pride. Emma bowed, her heart calm. She wasn't the frightened girl anymore. She was the music itself. The story made real later that evening. She stepped outside, looking up at the night sky. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Your music will heal people one day." And it had, starting with her own soul. In the years that followed, Emma became more than a performer. She became a mentor, opening a small music school in her city. It wasn't grand, but it was full of laughter, old pianos, and children who believed in dreams. On the wall hung a framed photo of her in Vienna. Beneath it, a single quote, "Never let humiliation silence your song." Sometimes, when she played late at night, she could almost hear her father's gentle hum joining her, the sound of her mother's smile nearby, and the quiet whisper of destiny. The girl who once cried at a piano in shame had turned her tears into symphonies. The mansion that once mocked her now honored her, and as she pressed her final note that night, she knew something deeply true. Every cruel word, every broken moment, every tear had been a part of the music. Emma Hale had not just found her place in the world. She had rewritten it note by note, until her story became a melody that would never fade.